Hey, everybody, Rob Nelson, and it's Rob Nelson Live, our Friday broadcast. Super excited to be here today. We are talking all things cannabis. Now, I don't know if you smoke weed, don't smoke weed, but cannabis is a massive, massive industry. It's not just a widespread cultural thing. It's become a massive industry. They estimate that by 2025, sales of cannabis will be $23 billion a year in the U.S. That's $1.8 billion in taxes. Whoa, that's a big number. $4 billion spent by consumers smoking weed, and a quarter of a million new jobs. Think about that. 250,000 new jobs will be created in the next couple of years in the weed industry. And yet, despite how big it is, we're still divided on it. About 34 states have legalized marijuana for medical use. And about 11 states and the District of Columbia and a couple territories have fully legalized it. A handful of states haven't done either. But we're still in a divide. We're still in a point where everybody doesn't see it the same way. Weed, cannabis, and alcohol are in two totally different camps, if you think about it. Alcohol has been legal, except for prohibition, forever. But most people still are divided as to whether cannabis is the same. So there's a lot of people who still think smoking pot is somehow bad. Go back to the Cheech and Chong days. It's like there's still that remnant of like as if it's a bad thing. But drinking alcohol isn't. You can drink all you want. Now, I've said for years we should legalize cannabis. We should legalize weed. I mean, I always made the joke, you never hear about somebody smoked weed, went home, and beat up their partner. Alcohol makes people violent. I love drinking, don't get me wrong, but it makes people do crazy stuff and a lot of times violent stuff and drive cars and get in horrible accidents and all kinds of things that are bad, including killing lots of people with liver cancer. And yet weed doesn't do that. I'm not saying there aren't side effects to weed, which some we don't even know about, but overall weed doesn't make people, the old school thing in like the 60s and 70s was to convince people weed made people crazy, like they could become serial killers. But that was just because they didn't want people to do it. And I've always argued the reason the government really didn't want people smoking weed wasn't because they thought weed was bad. It was because they didn't have a business angle on it. They couldn't monopolize it. They couldn't monetize it. But now states have gotten smart. They're like, hey, we can monetize this stuff. We can make billions in tax revenue. And yet still the federal government refuses to see weed as a legal drug. It still says no, even though the states have said yes. It's still legally not okay by the federal government. We still have yet to see a presidential candidate say, I'm in favor of full legalization. And it goes so far as like Elon Musk, the entrepreneur, Tesla, actually was on Joe Rogan's show about 5 months ago, if you remember. He smoked weed with Joe Rogan, right? This is a billionaire, genius, tech genius, and, SpaceX and the whole thing. And when he smoked weed on that show, he literally, his stock fell. Tesla's stock and SpaceX stock fell, and the U.S. Air Force did a security check and said they weren't sure they're going to work with SpaceX anymore. I mean, the guy's literally going to put people on the moon, put people in space. He smokes a joint on Joe Rogan's show. That's how culturally divided we still are. So let's get into the conversation. I've got two awesome guests from the cannabis world, and you, all my viewers, I want you to join in. Let's talk all things cannabis on Rob Nelson Live. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Rob Nelson Live. All right. In the upper right-hand corner, you see Brooke Bergstaller. She was doing a little hand flower dance. I like that. Grooving music. Brooke Bergstaller. She is a cannabis journalist extraordinaire. She does the marijuana morning news on, if you know who the cannabis billionaire Big Mike is. He's got like 4 million followers on that IG where Brooke does the news. And she's got a new show coming out called The Next Marijuana Millionaire. Thanks for being here, Brooke. Underneath her, in the center, also, both of you guys got your hoop earrings on. We talked about that. Is Bianca Monica. She's the CEO and founder of Limona Creative, which she describes it, and I think it's fascinating, as a creative agency for cannabis companies, meaning she does all kinds of creative work with cannabis companies, from strategic planning to marketing to events to helping them position themselves, much like a traditional marketing agency would do, I would guess, but all in the cannabis space. Monica, thank you for being here. Brooke, thank you for being here. Let's dive right in. We can talk more about you guys as the show goes on. You guys are both experts in different ways. You're both millennials, right? You're both millennials. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And of a different generation than me. I grew up in a generation at the very earliest part of my life. Weed still was like viewed as like this horrible thing. You know, you snuck around the back, and the stoners, you know, in high school for me, the stoners were the kids who were the bad kids who went outside, smoked a joint in between classes. And it's like, those are the bad people, you know, and we've shifted to where it's no longer viewed that way by most people, right? It's still by some, as I said in my open, but most people, especially your generation, has moved to see weed as a far more benign thing, something fun, something healthy, something recreational, just like having a drink, if not even better. Take it from there. Either one of you, jump in.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think, I think some people viewed cannabis as being a bad thing way back when, but I think there's always been like an aspect of counterculture, whether that be in cannabis or the hippie movement or whatever it was, that has been pro-cannabis around the world. And cannabis has been around. It's been used for medicinal reasons for thousands and thousands of years. So I think there's always been like the torch holders.
Right.
And,
but go ahead.
Go
ahead. Jump in. Bianca.
No, but I think that they, you know, because just of the types of people that did smoke weed, people just thought they were just like free and can do whatever they want. And so people basically, you know, kind of pigeonholed cannabis users as one type of thing. And, you know, even with branding, you know, like nowadays you don't really see like the Kush Monster on branding, you know, for cannabis, especially in California. You know, you see these high scale, really beautiful packaging that kind of basically brings more normalization. And I think that, you know, with COVID especially hitting, we really saw, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but sales skyrocketing, which really kind of proved that like people really, you know, need this medicine, and are more willing to experiment, you know, whether it is, you know, smoking or even more so edibles at this time.
And Brooke, to your point, yes, it always existed in the counterculture as a sort of a thing. But what I'm sort of referring to in my childhood was kind of what you were getting at, Bianca. It was looked at almost like the Cheech and Chong type thing. I actually got to know Tommy Chong's daughter, you know, who's a grown up adult filmmaker now, really talented. But as an adult, I got to know her. But the idea was that, like, you know, if you watch the old Cheech and Chong movies, it's like the stoners were always these kind of kooky people. They were out of touch. They were lost in a car full of smoke blowing everywhere. It wasn't like a normal thing where an executive, again, Elon Musk, who is literally the epitome of alpha A-type, you know, building spaceships and cars and a billionaire smoking a joint. Like, you know, that's now normal, even though the media reacted weirdly to him doing that. It's not odd to imagine the most, you know, level-headed person, straight-laced, whatever, smoking weed as just the same way you'd have a martini in the old days or a beer, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we lacked accessibility for so long, like the greater population of people. But now, whereas when I first started doing cannabis journalism, I didn't share videos about myself. I thought it would be a bad thing for my career. My parents didn't like that I was doing it. Now, I'm literally sending my parents weed.
Same.
And do they smoke it?
Oh yeah, I smoke with my parents sometimes. My mom loves edibles. And to Bianca's point, like there's all these high scale, very quality products now. I saw a billboard the other day for Doses, who is absolutely the most intelligent brand ever from a marketing perspective, because they're going with the pharmaceutical look. They're so clinical. You never touch the plant. And I do think that that's where we're moving to. Is I'm a flower girl. I'm always going to want to touch the weed. I'm not afraid of it. But some people are going to be, it's going to be another vitamin on the shelf. There won't be any taboo around it. And that's going to happen really soon. And it's kind of cool.
Right. I think you're right. And I think we're trending toward that. So, you know, you talk about like your parents smoking weed. I think Brooke knows this. I have not smoked weed in forever. I mean, and it's not on a moral or anything basis. It was that when I had smoked weed in the past, I'd get a little paranoid and I got a little nauseous. So the last time I smoked weed was years ago in law school. And it talk about the change over, you know, a period of time. I smoked weed. I went to law school up north. I smoked in California. I smoked weed with a judge. He was a judge, and I'd met him on a vacation, and he and I smoked weed at his house in Marin County, and his 12-year-old daughter came home, and he hid the weed. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm hiding this from my daughter. And I'm like, Jesus, you're a kid. You hide stuff from your parents. Now you're a parent. You're hiding it from your daughter. He's like, yeah, she'll judge me if she sees me smoking weed. I think we've moved past that now. Like you don't, your parents can smoke with you, right? Bianca, I don't know if you've seen that in your life or with your, I don't know how your parents are or not.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy because, I feel like a lot of people who wind up having a career in cannabis, it kind of fell into their laps. Like I didn't really know I was going to be in the cannabis industry, and I was like, oh, I want to understand it, dabble in it, move to LA. And my parents never really thought it was crazy, but I have a very old school Italian family. Like my Nona now, she eats edibles, and she was like, she still says like, calls it like la droga, like a drug, but she was like, it actually makes me feel so relaxed. So about like a year ago, I brought home a bunch of weed for Christmas, and I got everyone to smoke, and my mom was like having the best time. And I think that going back to kind of what you were saying about it makes you a little bit paranoid and all of that. I think now because, especially in California, it's been legal. We've been able to experiment. There's different strains, different terpenes that give different effects. So usually when people are like if my mom is like, oh, I want something more relaxing, like I can recommend a specific product to her. So that's kind of a way I think it's changed a bit too.
So you're, for someone like me, just on a personal level, I could probably smoke weed now, right? Or eat edibles, and I wouldn't have that reaction. I wouldn't feel paranoid or nauseous. Oh, I might? Come on, I really need it right now. I felt like weed could be a really good thing for me, like I should be trying it. No, I'm joking.
Cannabis still makes me anxious. Certain intensities, certain dosages. Like if I have a 30 milligram edible, I will get paranoid and think the cops are coming. Like that's just kind of.
What do you guys say to people who? And I want to move on in a second to the whole way this works with the COVID era, because it's. Marijuana is an essential service industry. But just leaving on this note, what do you guys say to people, both Brooke, you as a kind of flower child journalist, and Bianca as somebody who works with brands and probably at some level thinks about how are we going to position this to the audience, who still have a little resistance about the morality, for lack of a better word. Again, I'm always struggled with it because it's like alcohol is no more moral than weed. But the sense of like, wow, I'm not talking the medical side, if long-term it's bad for you, whatever. I'm talking what you say to someone who still kind of gets stuck in that mindset that they think it's somehow a drug and it's bad. And it is a drug, but so is Advil and so is alcohol.
Yeah, I guess you could make the argument that all substances should be legal, and it should be up to people whether or not they elect to consume something and put something in their body. Like that's a very libertarian way of looking at it. But I do think that no, I don't actually think that maybe heroin should be accessible and whoever wants to do heroin should do it. Why I feel this way with cannabis is because there is just so much data, there's so much evidence that it's good for you. And like we are so quick as a human, as a society, to be infiltrated by media. In like the 1920s and 1930s, cannabis was in aspirin. It was in medicines. It was at our pharmacies, like not that long ago.
Yeah,
then in the 30s, we started diving into prohibition, and it's only been a couple of decades, but we've already forgotten that in our own American history. Our own American history is rooted in cannabis. Like we have so much, there's just lineage with the plant.
Right. Bianca, I keep calling you Monica because you have two first names. Bianca,
I know,
Monica.
it's okay. I go by both.
Before I get you on that, I'm getting some stuff. We're seeing comments. Brooke, just address for a second. Somebody just texted in, what's your experience? And she was a teacher. What's your experience with, there it is, you can see it, with high schools? Are you concerned that high school kids who, lose ambition and direction?
Oh, wow. Not necessarily. I started consuming cannabis in high school, and I do think like there is a level of parenting that has to be in play. Like there are laws. You're not to consume cannabis unless you are 18, 21 or older in some states. So I do think that like sometimes the laws actually do act in our biological favor to make sure that our brains fully develop and we become like the greatest potential being that we can be. But yeah, like for me personally, I was scared shitless of my parents that if they caught me smoking weed in high school, I would get in trouble. So I was really careful with it. I was in student government. I was extremely involved in my high school, and I wanted to be a stoner. So I think if it's already in you, maybe cannabis could be.
Is it fair though? And Bianca, from a marketing perspective, you know, you obviously have to be careful, right? Because let's face it, you can say teenagers shouldn't use it, but it's the same with cigarettes, whatever. Teenagers like to do things they shouldn't do. And a lot of times there's a subtle marketing pitch like, no, we don't want you to do it, but hey, go ahead. So we know a lot of teenagers consume weed just like they drink, just like they smoke cigarettes. From a marketing standpoint, how do you deal with all this stuff as when you're with your brands, and how much do you have to position kind of to a mainstream versus a more niche audience when it comes to, and maybe it's not everything's the same, but overall?
Yeah, I mean, in regards to, like everything has to be, 21 plus, as far as like, if you follow someone on Instagram, like they have to have, like, this is for people 21 plus and older. Sometimes they have restrictions and you have to enter that. There are a lot of rules and regulations on how you are able to market. And even, with kind of like the way things are marketed in dispensaries, like everything is childproof.
Right. And Bianca, I actually mean less the legal side and more the creative side. When you're just being honest, like put on we're sitting in a creative meeting right now. Do you talk about this with brands and go, what age group is this going to appeal to? Is not just the age
we
group,
definitely
also
have
the like mainstream thing. Like, are we appealing to a more higher class? You know what I mean? Like, how do you position?
Definitely. I mean, depending on each brand, we have to sit down and talk about like the target demographic and what direction, the visuals and the verbiage is going to go to actually attract that audience. So, we're not going for high school, kids, but we're going for people who are 21 plus, depending on what that age group is.
And what do you see? And Bianca, what do you see in your business? What do you see as the biggest trends happening in terms of kinds of brands and things that are really catching fire or are marketing differently, say, than it might have been 10 or 15 years ago? What's really on fire?
Yeah, like just visuals. I think, especially this past year, cannabis has really, really evolved to, brands having just beautiful imagery, beautiful content. It's not always, like a joint hanging out of your mouth, but actually making it like a lifestyle brand and a way to live and a part of your wellness routine. And I think that having kind of that messaging and education, especially around it, will definitely help people ease into cannabis, especially when it looks like, something that your grandma would have in her medicine cabinet.
So, I want to jump in with one more question from a person, and then Brooke, I want to use that to kind of leverage into what the whole thing with people, cannabis. Well, let's start. We'll get to the question in a minute. With cannabis, Bianca saying that it's a wellness. Wellness is an interesting aspect, and what's intriguing to me is that cannabis is an essential use. I don't know if people know that. Right now, in COVID, cannabis, like a grocery store, like a pharmacy, cannabis dispensaries were considered essential services. That alone is fascinating to me, that the tobacco stores closed, but cannabis was considered, I can't even imagine 10 years ago, the government saying cannabis is essential. Clearly it's viewed as essential for wellness, right?
Right. I mean, I think that's why there's such a discrepancy, is that the reason it's available is because people use it as medicine, and you can't prevent people who have gotten a prescription from their doctor for cannabis from getting their medicine during a time of a pandemic. But I also think that there's part of like a well-being and mental aspect why a lot of liquor stores were open as well, is because like psychologists deemed like people are gonna lose their shit if they can't lose their inhibitions in some way. And there's like a little bit of a balance there. But yes, cannabis businesses have been deemed essential. In Massachusetts, there was a little bit of a weird flux because they took the privileges away from recreational cannabis stores, but they were allowing medical cannabis stores. And so, yeah, that was just like up to the governor. He was just like, no, you know, something doesn't feel right here. But then, of course, yeah.
And at the same time, and Brooke, you pointed this out to me, I didn't realize this, that cannabis, while it's essential and could stay open, does not qualify for any of the government. Not that anybody's gotten any of the government support. Let's be honest. Nobody's gotten their unemployment. Nobody's gotten their stimulus checks. Everyone I know with a small business, you know, can't get the payroll thing. I mean, I'm picking on our government's inefficiency, and it's sort of sad, and I think people are fed up on that. But cannabis wasn't even allowed it, right? Like they're like, you don't qualify. You're essential, stay open, but we ain't giving you any support.
That's correct. And a lot of the cannabis businesses that have had to shut down, those employees are also not eligible for unemployment because they're. Really? I mean, yeah. So there's just, and you were talking statistics into 2025. Right now, there's already 250,000 people working in cannabis in the United States. Potentially, a majority of them will be ineligible for any type of disaster relief loan. But businesses, there are different legislators who are trying to push forward to change this, like Ed Perlmutter and Earl Blumenauer. There are some people who are recognizing that this is unfair. But it could be something that totally demolishes the cannabis industry. But it's an industry that's kind of used to getting punched around a lot. So right. I don't think like anyone's like, oh no, the government's not giving us money. It's like, yeah, no.
They never gave cannabis businesses money or loans or anything. You can't even open up a bank account if you're plant touching. So there are a lot of businesses that actually incorporate, and they're just intellectual property, but they're a cannabis brand, and there are different ways to kind of get around that for help.
You know, that's an interesting point you're both making. And Bianca, you're talking about the money thing. It's fascinating to me. And if people think about this, but cannabis is a billions and billions of dollars as an industry. It's legal in many states, and even for medical use in 33 states. There's tons of money moving around, and you can't put that money in most banks. I mean, I don't know if people actually not in the industry realize that. Like, you've got a huge cash flow, and people literally can't open bank accounts. And I was in Vegas working on a project for a little while where they were actually trying to create a blockchain, like a cryptocurrency, a blockchain technology token to allow people to move currency. You know, you take the cash, turn it into the blockchain token, and the banks would accept it. And the state was interested in working with them because the states don't like having hundreds of millions of dollars of cash floating around for tax purposes, for crime purposes. You're loading up trucks in the middle of the night with cash. So, I mean, why are we in such a resistant state? Is this all just the federal government's is that why it's the federal government?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Major.
So why can't, and because of that, states are scared. I mean, again, if I'm a state government, I want you to have your money in a bank, and I want to account for it, and I want to be able to make sure we're getting the taxes right. And the last thing I want is this wild, wild west. I thought it was interesting because Bianca, you said, I'm going to keep calling you Monica. I'm sorry. You said that, cannabis has always been used to not, it's like, we've never gotten help. Like, we're the ultimate entrepreneurs. We're the ultimate libertarians. We do it ourselves. We don't get handouts.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely don't. And I think that also kind of towards the end of 2019, the bubble kind of burst in cannabis, and a lot of people got laid off already. So I think that we have always been ready for a crisis in a way. Like, we're always trying to innovate and everything. And I mean, I'm veering off, but it's just amazing to be able to see what our community has done during this really crazy time. But yeah, I mean, even when it does become federally legal, big corporations, industries, whether it's big alcohol people or tobacco people, that's an opportunity for them to get into the industry. And it's we also don't want that either, because who knows what cannabis can turn into with additives and all that stuff. And we want to keep it pure and natural.
Right. Well, and I want to pick up on that for a second. Before I move on, I want to get one question. Bruce is behind the scenes on this. Bruce, if you go back, there was a question from an Elijah Ornstein about levels of use for anxiety with teenagers. And his question, basically, if Bruce can find it, pop it on the screen there. It was essentially, there it is. Seeing it smoking, it seems like it's all they do. The first part of that question before that was, is there a certain amount for anxiety? like the dosage? And I know you guys aren't doctors or whatever, but Brooke, you obviously spend a lot of time looking at the facts and the numbers and, you know, have a big audience. So what's your response to that?
I think, you know, the nose knows. I do think that whatever you're intuitively drawn to, whatever you're consuming, be it cannabis or food, like that's probably something that's good for you in a baseline way. I find that like 5 milligrams of an edible is a really nice starter sweet spot. And you can even go lower than that. They call a microdose of cannabis 2.5 milligrams of THC. And yeah, I mean, no one has to consume cannabis. Right? Like it is because it's the Wild West. We are our own laboratories. Like cannabis brands are creating edibles and then they're kind of just hearing feedback from the consumers and then modifying their recipes as they go, because we don't have a lot of data and science to figure out what works best for everyone. But every human body has a nervous system. You also have an endocannabinoid system. And like you could have deficiencies or issues in your nervous system, you could have that in your endocannabinoid system. Right. And cannabis can help soothe some of those imbalances in your endocannabinoid system. Some people don't have imbalances. So that's when you're smoking, that's where you could get anxiety because you're filling your bucket too much with weed. But there's a whole lot of, you know, there's terpenes, there's
right.
There's a lot that goes behind finding the right strain that does the right thing for you. And for me, it's like really low THC content. Like I'm honest about that. I can't smoke a vape. I like to grow my own weed, and I like 12% Shaggy 70s pot. Like that's it.
Dr. Brooke, seriously, like that was impressive.
Wow.
But let's talk for a second, because I do think it's fair when people say, you know, some people like, you know, even like Dr. Drew and whatever, people have come out and said they're worried about the excess that and I see it. Look, I mean, I'm a person who just observes with my eyes. I see people who have drinking problems. I know people who drink too much. They get, you know, whatever, too often, too much. I also see people who I know smoke too much. They're like stoned. They get stoned all the time and it affects them. So I think it is fair for us to look at it as like, it's a drug like any other drug, and it can be abused. And I think a lot of people do abuse it. You know, that I do see, you know, I do know people who are total stoners and they can't ever seem to get to the next level in their life. And I'm like, dude, stop smoking every day. Like, you know, and I think we try, the pro cannabis side kind of plays that down because it's been so many years having to defend it. But the truth is that, right, there are people who are just potheads who literally, you know, it's a crutch and they're just like a drunk in a way, but they're probably a little more functional than a drunk in some ways, and not violent. They're very happy people. They're very mellow people.
I think, you know, too much of anything is too much. I mean, sugar is a drug, you know what I mean? So it kind of, it really depends. And I think that, you know, there are times where I've been like, oh, I definitely have had too much, you know, THC this past week. I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And I think it's, you know, kind of having that check in with yourself about being like, am I doing too much? Kind of maybe balancing it out with CBD. There are other ways to consume parts of the plant that aren't necessarily like getting psychoactively high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, Brooke.
Well, I'm just thinking about like a lot of brands that Bianca works with. A lot of them are like female driven or just like very, like wellness based. And when you come at it from that perspective, then ideally there is a market of people that aren't trying to get fucking ripped from weed. Like I don't want to be so sconed that I don't know my name. And I've definitely been there before. So there are products and dosages reserved for those people. And then there's products that are like clean and cute that are designed for the person who's more careful with their
When we're looking at it, why is it? I mean, why is it that there's still such a dichotomy? I mean, you know, even hearing in your answers, you can almost like Bianca, almost in a good way, but a little defensive, like about the industry and about like, well, Brooke saying, oh, well, all of us have. But I get it. Like it's the cannabis industry is always in a defensive mode. Why have we not? I mean, again, I'm the one who just looks and says, it's a drug, no question. But alcohol is a drug, no question. You know, sugar is not a drug, but obesity kills more people. You know, literally every time I have a cigarette and if someone looks at me who's overweight, I'm like, listen, I can outrun you. Okay. Like I work out, like I can haul, like I got capacity. Like you're going before me because you're overweight. But when it comes to weed, we still have this thing that somehow it's kind of like the ugly stepchild, and you too would never be, I mean, especially Bianca, like she looks like she's out of like I don't know what the catalog would be, but you know what I mean? Like, yes, yeah, right. And like you wouldn't imagine that 20 years ago for like a spokesperson and a creative, exec in the cannabis industry. And yet we still have it. It's almost like a battle. Why have we not moved past that? What's going on in your guys' head that you think and especially you, Brooke, because you journalist on this stuff. What is it that keeps people still seeing weed as a odd little exception? It doesn't get treated the same as other drugs.
Not to get too woo-woo on you, but I do think that there is some bit of a war on consciousness. I do think that there's also a lot of racism.
You totally went woo-woo, by the way, but that's okay.
You what?
I said you totally went woo-woo, but that's okay. No, go ahead.
Disclaimer, I'm a hippie. But I do think that just like a lot of things, it's a power move on behalf of the government. And I think that there is probably a long pause that's happening for major industries like Bianca mentioned, alcohol industries and big tobacco, to watch the states and the novice brands and entrepreneurs flail around and fuck up and get shut down and go bankrupt. And then once the audience is built and the data is collected and we know what brands and things people like, people with the proper funding and ability to market will be able to dominate. I think that's probably a large part of it. Also pharmaceutical industries, like we're talking about lobbyists from the largest industries in the globe. And, but beyond that, like I do think that there's also, historically prohibition was started as an anti-race thing. It was like against Black and brown people and also against the hippies. And I think that's still to this day, you're fighting against people who will fight against the government. Like I'm questioning things.
Right. So, and it's interesting. I think that's a really fascinating point because I see it, I also saw this same thing with cryptocurrencies, right? Because they're also like, it's the same thing in the blockchain. If you dig into the cryptocurrency world, you hear all this bad stuff. If you go look at the major banks, every single major bank, every single major financial institution is investing in cryptocurrency stuff. They're investing either to jump on it or to prevent somebody else from getting it. They're hedging their bets. So when you put it that way with weed, it makes sense to me that like the government and the big players want something to be bad until they know they can control it and own it and master it. And it could be as simple as that, that it's the pure corporate. And I distrust the government. So I'm always like, just when the government says something's bad, maybe you should think twice. Like, why are they telling you it's bad? I don't think Trump's smoking weed, but Obama was probably home smoking weed in the White House, but I also think there's a cultural thing, and it is a little bit of a cultural thing still for some people. Like there's a weird moral stigma. Is that just us, not me personally, but having bought the media rhetoric that was built for so many years that like pot was somehow bad? Actually, we had a question up on the screen. Like, why do people, get more sentences, harsher sentences for pot than for other drugs? Why do we put people in prison for pot?
I don't know, but there are a lot of Black and brown people sitting in jail for just carrying, a gram of weed, and they're the ones that are getting penalized. I don't know why that's the case, but it's definitely not fair. But Brooke, I'm sure you can talk a little bit more about that too.
Well, mandatory.
And before you answer that, Brooke, Bianca, I would say what we do know, your point, it is true. There are far more people, and have been historically Black and brown people going to prison for weed and for pot and for mere possession. I mean, literally, third strikes on weed possession. Like you're putting someone in prison for possessing like weed, a plant that makes you high.
Yeah, I think that also ties back to the coronavirus conversation, that cannabis businesses have been deemed essential and it's recognized as medicine by state lawmakers, and yet you have people serving time in prison at the exact same time. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I pray to Goddess that whoever gets into in positions of power will continue to move forward with legalization efforts. I don't think there's any winding back, but I do think that as an industry, we're really eager to see federal legalization, and I still think there's a bit of a road ahead of us.
I think you're right. So as we're wrapping this up, let's take it both from the legal and the business side. So Bianca, what do you see going forward? Like, clearly we are mainstreaming this industry.
Mhm.
Are you looking at brands and companies that potentially are going to become major players at some point? Are there parts of this industry that are really going to, the average person isn't thinking of? I'm not talking about a dispensary. I'm talking about a new brand, a new technology, something I don't even know about that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think multi-state operators, like Cresco and people like that definitely have the chance and the funds. And because they're in all different states that are legal, to become, the Pepsi or Coca-Cola. I really think that being in California is definitely the place to be, because there's so much money to just be made in this state with cannabis, and the way we're able to market and brand. But yeah, it really depends. I mean, of the market that you're in and what kind of product that you are. But I think there's room for everyone, especially right now, because the stakes are kind of low and there's not a lot of people in it, and there's a lot of people on their way out.
Are we going to see like vending machines? Like, I can go like in the gym and I can get my Powerade, I can get my protein drink, or I can get my edible, or I don't know, is there liquid marijuana, like whatever, my marijuana protein drink? Are we going to see that in the near future, do you think?
I mean, I don't think necessarily like THC products. I don't think you're going to, because you don't see like vending machines for booze. I do think that cannabis will continue to be treated similarly to alcohol, like any part that can get you high. But CBD,
right, the medical side,
that's already happening. That's probably already at your gym right now in one of your protein bars, or there's some kind of aspect of hemp protein, hemp isolate, some kind of byproduct.
I want to see the cannabis dispensary machine. It's like,
there's one
this for your joints. There's
actually one at a dispensary, but it's at a dispensary.
Yeah.
I want one in my gym. If they ever open my gym up again, if I can go to the gym again. And so last thought on the political side, I predicted a while ago, and I was a little off with time, that I thought right around now we would start seeing a presidential candidate come out and say it's time to legalize, and they still hedge and haw a little. And it disappoints me because, again, I don't expect Trump to do it, but you know what? Like Bernie Sanders, why, Elizabeth, well, why are you guys not saying it? And they're not saying it because they're afraid they'll lose votes. But I think we're getting to the point as we mainstream where it is going to happen, where we're going to see major players finally coming out and saying, it's time we just accept this as a reality.
Bernie Sanders actually did very vocally say that his first day in office, he would sign adult use cannabis into he would legalize it in all 50 states federally.
For medical, right?
No.
Or for everything?
Recreational cannabis, he wanted to expunge.
I didn't know Bernie had said that. I stand corrected. So Bernie on board.
And Joe Biden actually just came out with his agenda called a Plan for Black America, which is so weird. But Joe Biden is pro decriminalization, which I think just goes to show you that he's got to be like, he's like all the other politicians. He's like, I can go there because I'm trying to get voters, but I can't legalize it because my hands are tied by big.
And I think we'll end it on that note, but I think that's a really great point. Decriminalization versus legalization. And again, I don't know. We need to for sure decriminalize. I'm sick of the fact that politicians are afraid to kind of own. Again, if you're going to legalize alcohol, legalize marijuana. It's that simple to me. It's like one is not worse than the other. And I can argue, as much as I don't smoke weed and do drink alcohol, I'm guessing alcohol probably causes more problems overall in society. So the fact that we are still a step away from that disappoints me. But the fact that we're having this conversation and that we're able to kind of see what's happening, and Bianca says California, I hate so much about California, but maybe that's one of the good things, like that, that I'm hopeful that in the next 4 years, this movement's going to grow where it's not going to seem like it's a movement. And Bianca, you're like, we're backed up against the wall industry, but we really have truly let it kind of become just like any other industry in America. Is that
Yeah.
not an agreement?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of work to be done, even on the state level of just the programs with social equity and how these programs are rolled out. But I think that we will definitely be able to get to that point, and I'm excited for it.
All right. Well, you guys, you've been awesome guests. Bianca, Monica, Brooke Bergstaller, and everybody out there watching. Thank you for watching Rob Nelson Live. We do this every week, 2 times a week. Once is a community one. I don't have guests. You just have people commenting like panelists, come on with me. The other is guests like this on Fridays. Keep up kind of cool, interesting conversations like we just had. You guys were awesome. The audience, thanks for everybody participating. Share this. You can follow me at Rob Nelson Live. Real quickly, you can follow Brooke at Brooke Stellar. That's all her social handles. I don't know if we have it on the screen. BROOKE. There you are. At Brooke Stellar. Instagram. Can we see that again? At Brooke Stellar.
Plug, Rob. Thanks for the plug, Rob.
There you go. You can follow Bianca at Bianca Monica. There she is. You can follow me at Rob Nelson Live. And really, seriously, share this broadcast with people. It's a YouTube link. Share it. Get in the conversation. My whole goal is to create conversations and get people to think. We're all too willing to just buy what we've been told. And even if it's something you think is your narrative, you're too willing to just be like, I believe it. Like, I think we all have to start thinking a little outside the box. My thought for the day is like, if there's something you don't believe in, if you're on one side or the other, say on cannabis, try thinking about the other side. You know, everybody always goes to Facebook and only sees their friends, like sees people who believe with them. They block people who don't. Like, let's all try like looking at a viewpoint we don't agree with and considering that might help us all balance out a little. That's my thoughts. I'm Rob Nelson. It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.